the Security Industry Association Vertical Insights Symposium on Critical Infrastructure Security. I'm Ron Hawkins, Director of Industry Relations for SIA. The Security Industry Association is the leading trade association for physical security technology businesses. We have more than 1,400 members, including manufacturers, integrators, service providers, and others. We provide a variety of services, including government relations, learning and development, technical standards, networking, and other resources for our members, all of which can be found on our website at securityindustry.org. We are also the premier sponsor of the ISC West and ISC East trade shows and conferences. We are very pleased today to have with us multiple experts on critical infrastructure security representing various roles. It should be an informative and fast-moving 2 hours, so remember that if you miss anything, we'll have a recording of the session posted on the SIA website. Also, please remember during the event that we welcome your questions, so if you have anything that you would like to ask or any comments that you would like to make, please make use of the Q&A icon on your screen. Now, I do want to make sure to thank our sponsor, Sage Integration. We greatly appreciate their support of this event and many other SIA events and activities. Check them out at sageintegration.com. So to start things off, we are especially excited to welcome as our keynote speaker, W. Barnett Jones. Chief Jones is the Chief Security and Integrity Officer for the Great Lakes Water Authority in Michigan, where he leads a staff of sworn law enforcement, security officers, firefighters, and civilians. He has nearly 50 years of professional law enforcement experience, having previously served as the chief/administrator of police, fire, or public safety for multiple cities, in addition to other law enforcement roles. He is a graduate of the FBI National Academy, Northwestern University School of Staff and Command Executive Law Enforcement Training, the Kennedy School at Harvard University, and the United States Secret Service Dignitary Protection Academy. This is in addition to a master's degree from Madonna University in educational leadership, another master's degree from Eastern Michigan University in technology, and a bachelor's degree from the University of Michigan, Dearborn. He also serves as a pastor at his church in Auburn Hills, Michigan. Chief, thank you very much for joining us. I recall us discussing recently how water is sometimes a component of critical infrastructure that doesn't get quite as much attention as some of the others. So we're really looking forward to your presentation today.
Thank you, Ron, for the invite, and I'm glad to be talking to the members of the Security Industry Association today. And I'll begin. What I want to do today is give you an overview of our operations, give you some of the identity of some of the threats that perceived threats or actual threats that we've come across. I'd like to talk to you about some of our solutions and countermeasures, those that I can briefly talk about in this venue, and talk about some of the recommendations that I have for people who may be sitting in my chair and other organizations, and how you need to network with other organizations to solve the problems that we are incurring in our field. Let me bring up the PowerPoint now. Ron, it won't allow me to share the screen. There we go. One thing about technology, it works for you and it can slow you down sometimes.
All right, there we go, Chief. Good to see it.
Got it? Okay, today I'd like to introduce you to the Security and Integrity Group of the Great Lakes Water Authority. We are, let me get past that. We are the unit that works for Great Lakes Water Authority, and most people here in the room do not know who we are. We are the largest wastewater and water system in Michigan. We have nearly 4 million customers, 5 treatment plants, 816 miles of transmission lane. We have 88 partners across 112 communities, and we draw our water from 3 water intakes. Now, for a lot of you that may be listening to this, Michigan is surrounded by fresh water. I Googled the information because I wanted to be able to provide you with how much fresh water surrounds the great state of Michigan. You know, we have the 5 Great Lakes in our area. We have 84% of the United States fresh water. And because of that, we have the responsibility for ensuring, as a security integrity group, that that fresh water is readily available to our 4 million customers. Now, I'm talking about the freshwater side, but I want to show you something. This is southeastern Michigan. For those of you that have never been to the great state of Michigan, this is when you hear of the metropolitan Detroit area, it is Wayne, Oakland, and Macomb. It is home to nearly 4 million people, and those are the people that we serve. Fresh water is important because everybody needs to have drinking water. But what about that stinky brown water that no one thinks about? Well, that's the wastewater system. We have the largest wastewater treatment facility in the United States. We serve nearly 3 million people across 19 member partners across 79 communities. And that is a major responsibility that I'm going to talk to you about today when we start talking about security.
Hey, Chief, can I jump in for just a minute? So we are still seeing the first slide with the sidebar of the additional slides.
You don't see
I don't know if you've been, I don't know if you've been advancing at all.
Yes.
So right now it's not in presentation mode.
It is advancing on my end, but not on your end.
Right.
Stand by.
And are you able to go to slideshow and start presentation mode?
We need to move that bar there. It's underneath there. The black bar. Let's see. I click in here. See if we're at the beginning now, Ron.
So right now it's still not in presentation mode, but you are on slide 7. And the sidebar is still listing all the other slides.
We're in presentation mode here, and I can advance the slides.
Yeah, that's not showing up for us.
Okay. Ron, I've got the tech guy here, and I'll let him play around with it. So we were in slideshow. Yeah, we're in slideshow. And you go to from beginning. And it's not doing it. It's going to recycle. It brings it up here.
Yeah.
Are you still?
You still can't see it, Ron?
It's still not in presentation mode now. We've had a suggestion that you might need to share a different screen.
Anything on your end now?
It's the same.
What about now, Ron?
No change. Okay, there it is. Now you're in presentation mode.
Okay, what screen are you on?
It is the one GLWA wastewater system. It's the header. And some facts about GLWA. And now it's showing the map.
Okay, you want to go back to the beginning or you want to start from here?
I can start from there. So
Okay.
Thanks for getting that sorted out.
Okay. Let's see if we have no more technical difficulties. This is a wastewater area. This is the area that most people aren't combined about. You use the facilities in your home or your business, you flush the toilets, you never worry about or wonder about where that water goes. That is the most important water that you have to be worried about, not the fresh water. You can go to a store and buy drinking water. However, the dirty, stinky water is the most important water. We have a saying here, one water, one team, one water. We're surrounded by 84% of Michigan's water. We take that water in through our pipes, we process it, we send it to the businesses and homes of 4 million people. They drink it, they use it, they send it back through the other pipes, back to our facility. We clean that water and we send that water back to our Great Lakes, cleaner than we intook it. That is the one water, one team motto. Now to begin with the overview of our security integrity group. For most of us in security, sometimes we are an afterthought. It's a terrible chair to be sitting in. When I came aboard about 12 years ago, I asked the CEO if she wanted me to run this operation the way I ran the police departments and the fire department that I served before I came aboard. And she said, absolutely. And I'm recommending to all of the people out there that are listening to me and seeing me today, that is the position you need to be in. Let's not be an afterthought. Let's sit at the chair. I am a member of the executive team here. I suggest you also be that, wherever it is you work, so that you can have a voice where the decisions are being made. That, I believe, is one of the things that I see as a threat for us, internally and externally. We are an afterthought in a lot of organizations, but not here for me. Our role is to protect drinking water and the stinky brown water, because if we can't protect it, we know what will happen. People will not have fresh water. We've had instances of water being tainted in our state. Everybody knows about what happened in Flint. So on our watch, we are want to make sure that that does not occur at the Great Lakes Water Authority. Over the last 7 years, we have invested over $20 million into infrastructure and resilience for our drinking water facilities, specifically to the security and integrity group. Why? Because this is our mission statement. And before I go any further, one of the things that I've learned in my nearly 50 years in the business here is that us baby boomers are not the only generation that's in the workplace. There are four other generations, and they all have a different mindset. So for the baby boomers who we learned from the great generation how to listen to orders and take orders and put things in place, the other generations question how we do things, why we do things. So one of the things I've learned with the mission and the vision and the value statement is bring all those other generations, all my coworkers into the room, representatives of them, and we came up with our mission statement. And I say it is shared and common because it allowed them to have some input into what it actually means for us at the security and integrity group. And I see that in our line of work as an internal threat and an external threat that we have to overcome. We have to have our voices of the people sitting at our table when we executives make the decisions about our mission, vision, and value statement, which I've done here. Our security integrity group is a 24/7 operation. We're at all our facilities. We have a fusion center. We have 5 wastewater treatment plants. We have the wastewater treatment plant We have drone operations. We have K9, which is a bomb dog. I have investigators that handle any investigations internally and externally, and I'll talk about that. And I have 19 firefighters who are hazmat officers who handle emergencies on that side for confined space with an idea and vision of looking toward the future. The latest and newest part of my operation is emergency preparedness operation. I have an emergency manager who oversees emergency response and planning, does drills and does exercises that we all go through every year, from the lowest officer and rank and then seniority to myself. We divide it as a police department or a fire department will be divided. There's a deputy chief, captains, all have support divisions, emergency services, and water services division, which is the largest division. We have a total of 83 officers, and we are currently in the growing phase. Overview of the threats internally and externally that I've perceived. In Michigan, we have the MCOs, which is the law enforcement standards. All police officers in the state of Michigan are MCO certified. When I sat at the table with the CEO, I asked her if she would allow me to transition my security officers, security guards, to security officers, to law enforcement officers, meaning they have police powers, the powers of arrest, the powers to follow the investigations for the threats that we get internally and externally. So I see this as one of the internal and external threats that we've managed to put on the table. We are in the process currently in the state of Michigan of having the legislature consider us as a one-time, the only entity, the largest entity of water service in the state of Michigan that will be certified as police power. So my officers, I currently have 5 that are sworn, but I will grow that number, making us a certified law enforcement authority under the state of Michigan law enforcement standards. And the reason why, I'll get into that. On the other side, as a fire chief, working on the wastewater side, we have the hazmat and the confined space responsibility. We've had a few fires. And although we can call for fire services externally, one of my visions was to bring that core service internal to our organization, which is why I grew and started a hazmat team, which is encompassing 19 firefighters, soon to be 22 firefighters and still growing, that will absorb and respond to any fires that we have on the property. With number of moments, the number of minutes we can beat back that fire before other fire services get here, we will save lives and we will save property. So that is another internal, external threat that I perceived, and we're taking steps to bring it in-house and make sure that it's no longer a threat, it will be strength. I also identified training as an issue. When I came on board, I had security officers that had never had any training. The training they had was uncertified. And one of the things I suggest to any of us in this role is that we bring in professionalized training, because training has been found to dramatically improve productivity and the performance by providing employees with the skills that they need to complete the essential task, which is doing the job. Increase the training hours, which we've done here. We're over 5,000. Last year, we'll be over 6,000 this year. And putting people at the table to bring forth those ideas through coaching and finding solutions, giving them the ability to learn, which provides direction and gives them knowledge, especially when we are challenging them with going out. Some of my properties are as big as 650 acres, located in nowhere's land. And there's 1 to 2 to 3 officers that are there daily, charged with the responsibility for protecting those facilities and protecting the people and the product that is so valuable to people in southeastern Michigan. Training is an internal and an external threat to how we operate, that as a senior security leadership person, you have to put that on the table and train your people to extinguish that as a threat. Another thing is appearance. I'm a career police officer, and I believe on the police side and the fire side that people look at us and they judge our character, They judge our integrity. They judge our ability to do our job simply in that momentary glaze. How do you look in your uniform? I push the uniform. I professionalize that uniform. I want to see my officers groomed. I need to see their posture, and we need to have a professionalized look. One of the things on the law enforcement side, as a chief, I was so opposed to was the vest, the exterior vest, where everything is on the vest. Now I see law enforcement officers with 5 guns, 3 tasers, flashlights, and everything on their vest. It looks like the military. How can you approach your citizens? A lot of our citizens have an adverse opinion and an adverse appeal to us looking militarized. And I have resisted this here. I've gone back to the old look, which is a clean uniform. And I believe that is an internal and an external threat that we as security leaders need to be able to manage. Moving forward here, we're going to move into emergency medical response. I have firefighters, and those firefighters have the emergency background for responding to first aid and any type of injuries and heart attacks and things that occur on our property. We're going to roll into that with the right vehicles and equipment to do that job. We're also rolling out computer-aided dispatch, which is going to help the Fusion Center. They have already had emergency medical training on how to respond over the phone when people call in those intense situations. Now we're going to have that full service through our organization. We're also expanding the responsibilities of the Emergency Preparedness Unit. In Michigan, unfortunately, with climate change, we have been getting some major storms, which cause major flooding. And we've got, our response to that is that we've put together an emergency response preparedness unit that will be able to help those citizens through the FEMA path and also through internally for us, training our personnel how to respond to these type of emergencies and disasters. And you see the next item there is the GLEWA disaster response team. One of my ideas and vision was to put together a team of people that have the equipment and the training to help to respond to our neighborhoods when we have those flooding, when we can bring in portable water in the 5 portable water trucks that we now have, with the training to help people, not only in Michigan when the tornadoes come through, but also we can respond to other states like Florida when they have hurricanes come through. And the number one issue that is an internal threat that is also external threat that we need to be able to communicate. And one of the things that we're moving to do is bring on a new 800 megahertz system, because if you can't communicate, you definitely will have some problems internally and externally. This has been a part, I say, a 5-year plan, but my 5-year plan has started in 2012, and each year it's been a 5-year plan. For 2024, we're concentrating on the certification process, which is going to the state legislature to get the certification to become a certified policing authority in Michigan. And 2025, we're looking to bring more and more training. And I'm recommending that if you're sitting in the same type of chair that I sit in, that you look at certification, that you look at training, that you look at the image of your your security officers, and you look at the structure. One of the things that I inherited was a dysfunctional security group. I had multiple people in multiple levels that reported to no one. Put in the proper structure, the type of structure that has a chain of command and a span of control. And that was definitely a threat that we have remedied here. And I'd like to push that forward as an idea for you. And communication, not only the 800 megahertz communication, but I have town hall meetings twice a year now with all of the members of my group. And we talk about things. And I ask them those questions because as a baby boomer, I now know that Generation Alpha, which is the youngest generation that's now in the workplace, and Generation Y and Generation Z, they like to challenge the leader. They want to know where those ideas come from. And that is an internal and an external threat within your workforce that you have to address. When I was a young cop, I never saw the chief. I never saw the sheriff, nor did I ever want to see them because that meant I was in trouble. But today as leaders, we need to be able to sit down with the people that we perceive to be at the bottom of the triangle, because really they're at the top of the triangle, we're at the bottom of the triangle, and be able to communicate with them and ask them questions and be able to allow them to have open discourse with us as their leaders. And the last slide, my recommendations for improving your relationship with your water service provider. If you're a law enforcement agency leader or a fire service leader or mayor or someone in a leadership role, and you have a wastewater treatment plant or a water service treatment plant in your area, you should know the people that work there, the leaders of that organization on a first name basis. One of the things that we've learned now is when a tragedy happens, a disaster happens, people are looking for us as leaders to be able to provide them with what they need. Every day, people need to drink fresh, clean water. And if you don't have a relationship with them, you need to develop it because you need to know what their weaknesses are. You need to know what their mindset is. You need to know what help they can get from you. It is important for us as leaders to develop those type of relationships. I have relationships now. When I took over 12 years ago, the Detroit Police Department didn't want to talk with us. The FBI didn't want to talk with us. The Secret Service didn't want to talk with us. No one wanted to talk with us. We were a dysfunctional, disorganized group of one of the largest, with the largest wastewater facility in this country in our backyard. Today, we have partnerships with all of those agencies and some that I can't mention because some of our investigations have went from little old backyard in Detroit to the Middle East. And that is why you need to develop those kind of relationships because you never know when you're going to have to reach out and get help for you and your organization. And Ron, I will end it there.
All right. Thanks so much, Chief. Awesome presentation. So we do have a couple of questions here. So, well, first, before we get to the questions, I want to thank you and your team for defeating the uncooperative technology threat. That was impressive. So I appreciate that. So, first question: does GWLA track compliance with training and certification requirements to monitor and administer this growth and threats related to noncompliance?
Yes, we do. I have multiple people within our organization that are tracking, plus we're members of other organizations that I have to submit reports to of any perceived threats internally and externally that we have had in a calendar year.
All right, great. All right. Could you describe how you identify and procure security solutions and how security companies can better work with you?
Well, we had a previous conversation about this. Cold calls generally don't work with me because what I'll do is I'll take a look at the information and I will forward to one of my captains. And one of my captains has the responsibility. I have a captain that has support service. So her responsibility is take a look at communications equipment, take a look at fencing, take a look at cameras, take a look at all those contacts that we utilize that brings the information into the Fusion Center. And I'll send that to her and say, check it out and take a look at it and let me know what we need. She is also a professional, I forget the name of the training that I sent her to, but she has the training and the background necessary to evaluate those types of technologies. And then she'll bring them forward to me, and then we'll decide on what the avenue we're going to go down. With fencing, we looked at the fencing. She looked at the fencing. We took a look at it. I'm just using fencing as an example. And then we figured out the best fencing necessary that couldn't be climbed by personnel. And then we brought in those type of vendors and we sat down with them and we began that process of getting them down the path to become a vendor here because everything is by bid. They became a vendor, a registered vendor, then they put in bids and then we selected someone through that process just using fencing. But I've done the same thing with cameras and other technology also.
Right. Yeah, I recall you mentioning in our previous discussion the importance of relationships.
Absolutely.
In contrast to the cold call. So, all right, that's all the questions we have, and the timing is just about perfect. But any parting remarks you'd like to make before we go?
I'm always available. If you understood what I rambled through, you can give me a call if you have any further questions. I don't like Zoom meetings. I prefer to be in person, but this is what works. And if you have any questions, give me a call.
All right. Thank you so much, Chief. Always a pleasure.
Always take care, Ron.
All right. Take care. All right. Next up, we have a panel discussion on security solutions that can address some of the threats and challenges that Chief Jones talked about. So I'll ask our next 5 panelists to turn on their video and join us. And we will start with some brief introductions. I'll ask for some self-introductions. So Ike, if you don't mind, would you lead things off for us?
Yeah, sure. Well, thanks for having me here. My name is Ike Atlas. I am the CSO and Director of Security for Industrial Fence and Perimeter Security Solutions in Chicago. We're a manufacturer of high security barrier systems, and we also provide security consultation.
All right. Thanks, Ike. Next up, Dave.
Good afternoon. Thanks, Ron. I'm Dave Karsh. I'm with Honeywell. I run our end user program to work directly with utilities, critical infrastructure people. I've been in this industry for 20 plus years. For Honeywell, I represent the commercial security market, and that's where we are the manufacturer of software and solutions for this space, and we sell them to our partners.
All right. Thank you, Dave. Saray?
Good afternoon, Zaray Megradinian with Hanwha Vision Business Development nationally. I've been in the security and video security industry for about 20 years now. Critical infrastructure for, I would say, about 15 years, which includes utilities, oil and gas, and Department of Transportation. My specialty is in video analytics and using video for operational safety and enhancement. So thank you.
All right. Thank you. And John?
John Nomorowski. I'm the Chief Operating Officer at Sage Integration. We work closely with the Honeywell team on integrations, especially around regulated utility markets. Interested in the conversations today as we talk about some outside threats, whether it's earthquakes, floods, tornadoes, as well as destruction done at some of these substations, manned and unmanned, through theft and vandalism and arson, and things we've done to protect against that and workplace safety efforts. Thanks,
All right,
Ron.
thanks. Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, John. And Sean?
Yeah, Sean Wallace. I'm the Director of Critical Infrastructure for Unlimited Technology. Been in the space probably 20 years. And before going into physical security, I spent about 6 years in cyber. And prior to that, I ran the transmission distribution group for a large engineering construction firm, and was also the project manager on several large power plant projects.
All right. Thanks, Sean, and thank you, everyone. All right. So in the past couple of years, we have seen an increase in attacks on utilities, particularly energy substations. Attacks in North Carolina and Washington were certainly in the headlines quite a bit. But in 2022 alone, there were almost 1,700 physical security attacks reported. That was an increase of more than 10%. And I actually saw a quote from the CEO of NERC that all of these attacks have put physical security back on the top of the agenda. I don't know why it had been pushed down the agenda to begin with, but now it's back on top. So to start the conversation off very generally, is the threat picture today that much different than it was 5 years ago, or say, pre-pandemic, pre all the geopolitical crises of the past couple of years? And what does that mean, not only for utilities, but for solutions providers? And I'll just open it up to whoever would like to jump in.
Yeah, I think it's gotten a little bit more acute. You have the recent attacks that we all know about, the Metcalf, Moore County substations in North Carolina. And you've always had kind of low-level theft that's been going on throughout the industry that kind of rises up and down with copper prices, passive interest in substations for people that aren't committing malicious intent, but just want to get on and do vandalism and cause trouble. But what's really gotten interesting is, I think, the threat from terrorist organizations that are operating on domestic soil, then also even domestic terrorist organizations have taken a keen interest in substations to get leverage over the electric grid. And I think those things, and honestly, if you go on the internet, search the dark web, you can find entire web pages that are dedicated to effectively radicals instructing others how to take down transformers at substations. That I think has gotten an increase. And, you know, with your comment about physical becoming more acute, I think cyber had years of catching up and is finally getting to the place where cyber is kind of getting there, if you will. And that's caused the viewpoint now to look back at physical security, especially in light of what I just related and in with recent attacks.
Dave, I
And
think you're.
yeah, I agree, Sean. The physical threat has grown over, I've been working in the utility space for 20 years, and you see guns are much more prevalent around the world, radical people getting in a newspaper and showing that the US would be a weakness. And historically, a substation sits there. You don't have to be a genius to follow the wires and find it. So you can easily cause harm and put on that new threats like drones and drone technologies that didn't exist years ago that are easy to knock out power and put people in jeopardy of having no lights and no heat. So yes, it's definitely going up, and many utilities are seeing that.
Yeah, Ron, I'd concur with Dave. We've seen such an expansion over the last 5 years of outdoor gunshot detection deployments at these manned and unmanned substations, where in prior years we'd protect the perimeter, thermal imaging, we'd have access control, wireless locking hardware. So it's really, as Dave talked about, now become about drones and counter drone defenses, as well as outdoor gunshot detection. So those, I think, are the biggest changes we've seen, Ron.
Right.
Yeah, I would add the last few years with increased use of drones have become definitely a nuisance, and using a multi-layered approach for perimeter intrusion detection kind of helps mitigate that, using things like radar. You mentioned gunshot detection, so it's multiple layers of technology where you can filter through some of the noise and reduce those false positives using AI or artificial intelligence. But other than the buzzword, what that really does is more reliable video analytics and being able to detect threats possibly as they approach, and maybe using some of that data or metadata and doing things like predictive analytics based on some of the assets you have in place.
All right. All right. Great. So, and Ike, I'll turn to you for the first question. So we were a few days ago when we were having a discussion, you mentioned adversary sequence diagrams. So I think the opening comments kind of lead into that pretty well. So can you elaborate a bit on that and their role in designing and deploying solutions?
Yeah, for sure. Thanks. I think, well, first of all, you have to understand when you start your assessments, right? If you start at the perimeter, you have to understand your design basis threat. You have to understand what you're protecting against. I've been to too many sites where I've been given a set of plans and said, here, put in this equipment. And my first question is, who are you protecting against? And they don't know. And so once you understand who your threat is, what their capabilities are, then you can start chopping up your barrier systems. It could be physical or technological, or just space and time, and understand how long an adversary is going to take to get through each one of your systems. Develop that diagram, and then you can understand where your gap is, and then use it to fill in again with either physical or technological barrier systems.
Yeah, Ron, I totally agree with what Ike is saying. We've seen so many of our regulated utility clients standardizing around different kinds of fencing, anti-climb, anti-cut fences, as a standard, and just rinse and repeat it each substation once they get going as a first line of defense. And
if we're looking at one particular one particular threat that has been mentioned in the initial comments. So when we look at drones, the threat from drones, the counter UAS options that are out there, and they're obviously very limited in terms of counter UAS. It's really more about detection. But can you talk a little bit more about how utilities can try to start to address that threat?
Ron,
Yeah,
I'd like to, go ahead, sorry.
Oh, no, I was going to say in the conversations I've had, you're right, Ron. They really can't take action against the drone itself right now. The regulation and the legal cover doesn't support it. But they're in the mode of gathering information. So I'm finding a lot of them are turning to drone detection technologies because if they can start collecting information about the amount of traffic and the amount of drones that are actually operating over their critical assets, that's going to help the industry build a case to be able to take a little bit more forthright of a response. And it's shocking. Some of the large asset owners, when they get into this, even just at a limited number of their BES-high sites, the amount of drone traffic that they're detecting is incredible. So a lot of them are able to find funding then to kind of expand that network just to collect the information. And then hopefully the industry can build a case someday to get a little bit more aggressive on response, in the name of protecting the assets.
Dave?
Yeah, Ron, we've been lucky enough. So I'm serving on an FAA ARC board today to help direct the utility industry. And we're trying to work with the FAA because obviously there's a big push to let drones be more valuable for the things it does well for us, and then keep away from the bad and the dark drones. So trying to work on the legislative point, matter of fact, that's wrapping up for the year so that we can put better plans together because, as Sean said, we can track a lot of drone activities, but there's very little the utilities can do to defend themselves if they see that. But understand with our NERC regulations, detect, deter. So if we do put together a resilient plan, John and I have worked on several of those, that gives the utility the ability maybe to shift power if they detect a drone or a harmful drone, because today we don't have the legislation that we can put on any type of defense against that drone, but we might be able to shift power from this sector to that and shut down that. And I think that would benefit all the utilities and the nation as a whole if we're more proactive that way.
Well said, Dave. Ron, it's interesting as we talk about changes, and Sean and Dave really hit the nail on the head as far as regulation around what we can do with what we're collecting from drone or potential drone attacks. But if you had said to me even 3 years ago, John, you're going to start to employ drone pilots as a systems integrator, I would have laughed. But today, how else would you test your clients' ground and air-based radar and thermal imaging cameras if you're not deploying your own pilots to test against it? So it's interesting as staff changes have made, and you post for job listings as looking for drone pilots. So the market around protecting critical infrastructure has surely changed.
Oh, yeah. So you actually have to find Part 107 licenses up there.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, and even with drones, it's not so much the attack, it's just they're being used for reconnaissance. So, and I think in the past you could look out for suspicious people with binoculars, scoping out the area. Now you can do that with a drone. So it may not even be an attack. It could be just planning out where the weak spots are, where the cameras are located, and move from there.
So, Zoe, I'd like to stick with you for a minute. You mentioned where the cameras are located as an example. So, expanding beyond just drone detection, but security in general, how does video fit into this at the perimeter and also internally?
Yeah, well, it's using multiple layers of video analytics. I think in the past it was pixel change, simple line crossings, but now you can run your own inherent analytics on the edge with low latency. I think that's kind of the key, is being able to do something with low latency and drive some sort of a active deterrence. Could be a horn speaker, it could be something sophisticated like a LRAD system where you're trying to make that person blind or deaf so they can't fire off rounds at a transformer. But I think the conversation now is, historically it's been low light, using thermal, using infrared, and getting a usable video image. But I think now it's, having multiple zones. It's not just jumping the fence, it's people loitering, it's people approaching the fence. Was that and then the false positive's always been there, but, is that a garbage bag flying over? Is that wildlife loitering out there? So I think that's where the AI and the object detection come into play, because, is that a black bear, or is that a person? And then, from 500 feet out, it could be difficult with a camera. But I think that's where we're seeing that. And then you could also drive things like smart LED lights. And, we see those on street lights for smart cities, but they're coming to the perimeters as well. So if you can, even a flashing light or lighting change on the perimeter could deter someone and make them think twice. And I think especially in rural areas where, a lot of these locations are, you can't get a first responder on site that quickly. So you've got to kind of work with what you have and leverage the technology and maximize those dollars.
Right. I think we've managed to go about 15 minutes into this discussion without mentioning AI yet. So I'm going to break that streak now. But so what role does that have, and what role will it have going forward?
Well, on the video side, it's better classification of a person versus a vehicle or other aspects. And then third party, there's companies out there that can verify drones in the air. It's not something that could be done on a camera, but server based using GPUs. There are some solutions out there that could, let's say, give you that drone confirmation. But artificial intelligence is giving you better and more accurate information. That's really the key.
Yeah, and some of the advances for me in brandishing detection have been really exciting, where, if an individual is walking down a hallway over a school, the video analytics can identify if they're carrying a weapon. Some companies have been able to extend that to outdoors. And as the analytics improve, one can imagine ground radar system picks up an individual, slews a camera to that location, and the analytics can actually tell if the individual is carrying a rifle. So I think John has talked about the increase in gunshot detection that's being installed out there. If we can improve the video analytics using AI and get to brandish detection further out at the fence, now you're moving up your time to respond. And that just can improve the ability, of law enforcement or, other first responders to get there quicker.
Right.
Okay, also, if jump in here on the planning side, if you take it all the way back to planning and strategy, you can run a lot of simulations and ask AI to figure out the best route for adversaries, and then fill in, again, using an adversary sequence diagram with your design basis threat, fill in barrier systems within that platform, keep running these simulations, and AI will, basically spit out a pretty good foundation to start from if you're starting from scratch. I think just again, using that as a plan.
Yeah, the one thing you could add is I'm starting to see more digital twins and mapping of substations using LiDAR, giving you that 3D representation. So, do you need a 10-foot fence? Do you need a 12-foot fence? Does it need to be a mile? Does it need to be a mile and a half? And, you can save money on your design, and B, you can do that without compromising your security or even increasing it. So I think that's new. And then if you can take the data from the camera, the field of views, possibly AI detection, and simulate that with your diagrams and planning, I think that's where you can get some more bang for your buck.
Yeah, we've been using point clouds for, I don't know, close to a decade now, using drones and stuff to get LiDAR scans and using that type of stuff. And now AI is fitting in very nicely with that.
All right. So covered video, how about access and identity in terms of making sure the right people are getting into your facility?
That's right, Ron. I think good call out there. And I think as we talk about AI on this call, I think Zareh's done a great job keeping us neutral, right? We're solving problems that we couldn't solve with video analytics. And so we're now using artificial intelligence to do that. So I think as we get into the access side, solving our clients' problems with voice and facial recognition, authentication, identifying those individuals that pose a threat, whether it's through criminal background investigations or however we're tying them to that identity or facial authentication, I think is some of the things we'll solve for our regulated clients with AI.
And Ron, this is Dave. The access controls tends to be the basis what a lot of our systems are built on. But the intelligent command portion, we have a lot of disparate third-party and Honeywell generated and systems we've been doing in this space in North America, but bringing it all together into a single pane of glass to make it, because we can have hundreds of thousands of dollars or millions of dollars of technology to go onto our security operational center guards who maybe are making $18 to $20 an hour. So we have to be able to layer those alarms or the alerts that they can make appropriate responses to give law enforcement enough time to get there and not overburden them with too much information. I think that's really our biggest goal. I think we've been seeing in the market, so we can make it simple for that operator to respond to the alerts that are generated.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. I recall talking to a security director in the stadium security field at a major professional sports team. And he was saying that there's all this great technology, but how do you make it usable for the person who's sitting there making $15, $18 an hour, and they have to master all of this complicated technology. So yeah, that's a great point. And John, so let me go back to you on a related topic here. You do have all these technologies: video access, drone detection, weapons detection, all from different companies. How do you integrate that? How do you make it all interoperable? How do you get to that single pane of glass approach?
Yeah, I think that's where Dave was headed, right? You really need to pick a platform that is going to be open to integrate those things, so your client can eventually get to that single pane of glass where they're seeing, simple things like access denied, or I'm using Sean's car today and they're seeing Sean's picture from a video badging imaging system, and I'm walking in the door. To integration of thermal imaging, to having the right analytics on your NVR, to choosing the right facial authentication partner or voice authentication partner to be integrated into those systems. So interoperability starts to play a big deal, whether you're integrating with different gunshot or weapons detection or fence systems or intrusion systems, is critical in choosing technologies for your clients. And I think as long as you're working closely with your technology partners, manufacturers, as some people like to say, and you're working towards that client goal of having that single pane of glass for this security operations center that is going to be kind of the quarterback of this whole thing, I think that those thoughts in mind help you build a world-class program.
Right. Yeah, and I would also think about extending integration through cybersecurity and into the IT realm as well. A lot of the asset owners are addressing insider threat as one of their biggest risks, and as part of that, they want to incorporate access control information and physical security that really comes from our sector, in addition to cybersecurity and profiling what the individual is actually doing on the computer network. They're bringing that information together to try to get a profile of the individual to see if they're at risk of quitting their job or stealing their information or causing harm to the company itself, or trying to get some measure of leverage over it. And over the last couple of years, more and more, you've seen physical SOCs, security operations centers, and cybersecurity SOCs start to combine, or at least get installed physically next to each other, so that your cybersecurity team and your physical security team can communicate. Because just like we see in the GridX exercise, which the last one just went on in October, and I've had the benefit of sitting in some SOCs at some of the big utilities while this is going on, they see cyber and physical starting to converge, where an adversary will mount a cyber attack, and then that could be an upstream to distract somebody from a physical security attack. So when you're looking at integration, I would just consider that component as well, and just think of it maybe not just as a physical security systems component, but also stretching through cyber and IT as well.
Right. All right, so utilities facilities, they have to defend against these threats that they identify, but then at the same time, related but still somewhat separate, they have to meet their compliance demands. So last week, I think you made the point that it was San Bernardino shootings that led to NERC 14. So how does that fit into all this in terms of meeting the client's needs and helping them to to meet SIP 14 and other compliance requirements?
Yeah, I think it's again, it kind of goes back to the response, right? You have to go back, you have to understand what you're putting out there, what type of equipment, what type of barrier systems, what type of technology. And then does it fit into protecting exactly what your design basis threat is? And to meet that compliance, you have to basically prove, right, that what the technologies and barriers you're putting out there are able to close that gap of response between detection and an adversary getting through your barrier system.
Right, Sean. I recall one of the comments that you made the other day that in some cases they're willing to accept a fine rather than invest in the upgrades that would be necessary.
Yeah, so I don't think that's necessarily true. However, the utilities are taking a risk-based approach, not only in compliance with the NERC standards, as far as like high, medium, and low assets go, but they have thousands of substations at the low end of the voltage spectrum that are basically running distribution. So from a practical basis, they can't install highly advanced security systems at all their facilities. So in this risk-based approach, they're taking it not only for compliance, but also just for the health of their own transmission networks at the lower voltage levels. A lot of times their focus is on response. If a small distribution substation gets taken out, maybe it blacks out 1,000, 5,000 people, and they could have that substation back up and running in 36 hours because the transformers are basically stock and they keep them in the laydown yard. That's an acceptable response to those assets. So not everything out there is going to have a security system like this, and part of their plan is to focus on response for a lot of the lower voltage locations because it's not cost effective to put things in there.
Well, that's a little bit, I think, jump in that we're seeing scalability and the sustainability of what we're putting in there. So a lot of the lower substations, we even use some wireless equipment in there, some wireless locks, padlocks, doors going into the protected areas that we can track and give reference to. We're also seeing a growth area in visitor management in these substations so that we can collect the data of who's going in, because the auditors today want to make sure that if I'm escorted in, that they're just not calling back to the GSOC center, that they don't go to a kiosk or technology that's going to record that information and it's going to be auditable down the road. So there's a lot of more stringent things that are even going down to the lows for maybe a good percentage of the larger utilities. Sometimes the funding doesn't come as easily to some of the small utilities that are searching harder to get the money to protect their portion of the grid.
Yeah, Ron, one of the things Dave and I are seeing quite a bit is some of the regulated utilities we work with are submitting their 10-year plans for approval with the Department of Energy, getting those capital spends approved. And obviously, once they're approved, they're passing most of that spend plus some profits onto the consumer. So we've seen some increased spending year over year on not just, we've seen it across the board, but we've seen it impacts us most in physical security. So we've seen some of those smaller substations that we hadn't visited in the last 25 years, and now we're finally starting to secure.
Right.
In the regulated markets.
Right.
Yeah,
Sorry.
I think some of these tier 3 substations, which are sometimes in urban areas, sometimes not. I think what'll make it scalable is the adoption of AI and the evolution of AI. So when AI comes from the server into the camera. You don't need a server. You don't need another GPU-based computer to run these different models. Once those kind of come to the camera, then they become much more scalable, and you can maybe put together a kit of a dozen cameras and secure let's say 90% of that substation fairly well with a pretty cost-effective, scalable solution. And that's going to take some time, but I think in the next 5 years, as the AI gets better, starts coming onto the camera, and then the chips or the SoCs in the cameras get stronger, they can support these different models and leverage your dollars a lot further in some of these smaller substations.
Right. All right. So they can put a great solution in place, but still can't do it all yourself. So what about coordination with local law enforcement?
Yeah, Ron, I think that's a critical one, and I think a lot of the clients we work have made those preparations, right? Because now you have this gunshot detection, or Sean talked about weapons detection system going off. The GSOC or the SOC is now calling out to law enforcement, and they get to a corporate headquarters, and what do? Right? It's a mega campus. Where do we go? What do we do? Where are we responding? So I think that interaction, just so there's awareness on each shift of what do I do when I get to this 40 building campus, or if it's not a substation, maybe it's the corporate headquarters for one of these utilities we've talked about. Or even if it is a utility location, what do I do when I get there? Where do I go? And what are my points of concern? And who's my point of contact? So I think those relationships, as we heard the chief talk about, are critical at multi-levels. And when you're working with some of these larger utilities that have thousands of locations, it's quite the challenge to get those relationships in each jurisdiction.
All right. And so kind of leads into another topic. In terms of training and drills internally, is that something that they're coordinating with local law enforcement? So if there is an incident, they're not just training their employees, they're also working with their public safety partners.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah.
And we've seen a lot more of it as we deploy, whether it's concealed weapons detection or weapons detection analytics or gunshot detection. All right, what happens, right? Because maybe you do have a staff like the chief that is carries that police power, but if you don't, what are your next steps, and what does law enforcement do when they get to site? So we're seeing a lot more of those interactions as far as training and drills. Anywhere from Fortune 5 companies all the way up to smaller utilities.
Yeah, and I think even simple walkdowns can really pay forward. For law enforcement, they really have a lot on their plate with the span of things that they have to respond to, across the county. So when they walk to or drive up to a substation and you kind of see this shack somewhere inside the fence line, you don't know if it's full of lawnmowers or what. We all know that it's got the control equipment in it and access to the network. So that might be a prime target for somebody looking to do harm. But if law enforcement doesn't understand that that's really what's going on inside that small indiscreet shack with the air conditioner hanging off the back, maybe the next time they come on site, it'll help them understand where the real critical assets are at the location. And then also, where some of the safety hazards are. So that could maybe pay forward in other ways. And it almost costs nothing to do something like that and can create a little goodwill with local law enforcement.
Right. All right. All right. So we haven't yet touched on cybersecurity, and obviously those attacks have been increasing as well. But at the same time, Sean, I think as you noted, we could go on for days just on cybersecurity. But the component that maybe we can touch on here is we have all these physical security devices in place that are all on the network. So how do you ensure the cybersecurity of your video cameras, of your access control equipment, so that each endpoint does not become its own little cyber vulnerability?
Yeah. So I think for us, Ron, and I'll have Dave maybe touch on a little bit as well. Before anything goes on site, any piece of technology has gone through some type of infocom group to say, okay, this is okay to be on our network. Once it is on the network, right, having stringent things in place, and on the access control side, something as simple as OSDP and Dave and I fight this battle every day of getting clients to just be OSDP compliant, open source device protocol compliant. Instead of using a 40-year-old WeGAN technology for communication, update your communications protocol so you have encryption. So that's one. And then, Ron, you already mentioned simple things that we still see in the field is change the password on the camera from the default password. And what's your routine to do that on a monthly or quarterly basis? And these are some simple things before we take any deep dive into all these IoT devices we're now putting on clients' network or connecting through networks. But those are some simple steps for integrators and manufacturers and practitioners to take together.
Thanks, John. I'll also jump in. I agree with John. Most of all these good customers will have a development lab, and they will have one of everything that we have in this development lab, and they'll run their whole gamut of cyber testing on those devices to make sure. And we're going to have a product standards list that they can use. We all know there's probably 10 million cameras somebody can pick, at least 5 million, but we're really going to.
I think Dave might be frozen.
So I know Honeywell does an amazing job of doing cyber testing before we release any product. It has to go through our own cyber department before I can get a sign off to sell it. But the utilities are also correlating these alarms. So if they see a rise on the physical and the cyber alarms, they're going to raise their threat level to law enforcement. And that's so important with the correlation between the two. And if we don't have a shared SOC, which many do not, but if they have a co-located or work together teams, the better utilities have the better physical and cyber teams. And if they recognize a threat to them, they should be able to correlate those two together and react much stronger than from a single threat.
And all right. I think, Ron, the one thing we haven't talked about yet is SOC 2 compliancy, service organization control, and initially hit us through privacy and not so much yet in the regulated markets because we're not allowed to do a lot of cloud in regard to that. But it's starting to become more of table stakes for the integrator and technology partner to enter is, hey, where are you in your SOC 2 compliancy? And even a year and a half ago, if somebody would have said to me, where are you with your SOC 2 compliancy? I would have called Dave and said, what the hell are they talking about? But now it's part of every conversation that we're in. And obviously that's a big impact on cyber and a lot of the things Dave and I deal with around audit standards. This is just a strange one because it's the American Institute of Certified Public Accountants that's managing this standard. So it's a different body that we're answering to, but it's still an important compliance that we all drive each other to get as far as making sure our clients are cyber secure.
Yeah, just to add a little to what John said, for the utilities themselves, their biggest risk in the cyber realm are third-party providers by a long shot. So they've done a very good job of taking care of themselves in-house. And like was mentioned, they even have test labs and things for equipment. They're pushing their defensive perimeter out to their supplier network. And those are things that if you're a supplier in any form to a utility, you've got to be conscious of. They're not trying to make your life difficult. Time and time again, it's clear that the third-party supplier, services provider is their number one liability when it comes to cyber risk.
Sean, I think you made the point the other day that a cyber attack, even if it's not directly on physical security equipment, a cyber attack can be a precursor to a physical attack. Can you elaborate a little bit on that?
Sure. The cost for our adversaries to mount a cyber attack is fairly low. And the reality is utilities across the country, and we recently saw this with a couple of water utilities, the adversaries are now just using cloud compute power to mount these attacks. So their cost of actually mounting attacks actually decreased while the frequency of attacks has gone up. So the utility sector has kind of had to rise to meet this demand. Those are the same people that would commit a physical attack. So it's not much of a stretch to believe that you have terrorist cells operating in the United States that are basically sleeping until called upon to attack a number of substations, to take down our grid, to distract us while the nation state maybe makes some geopolitical move. So those same groups, backed up by nation state offensive cyber teams, would work in concert, and you would see C2, which is command and control, start to happen, and initial cyber attacks in a system. If that can be identified as nation state, then you might take a look at your high BES system assets and put a little bit more attention on monitoring theirs, because it could be a precursor to physical. And that's what the GridX exercise does about every, I think it's every 2 years. The last one was in October, actually, of this year. It's always a combined cyber physical.
All right, and we're already starting to get a few questions in here. So just to make sure we have enough time, I'd like to read some of them now. So as far as cyber, what about device vulnerability scans being performed regularly, seeing as how new vulnerabilities are discovered after deployments?
Yeah, Ron, I think that a lot of the consultants and practitioners we work with make that part of your commissioning, right? And again, as we've moved forward, when we commissioned systems 5 years ago, that wasn't even a thought. But now vulnerability scans, as you're deploying larger systems, are part of commissioning and closeouts. And you're really working a lot closer with IT teams, security teams, your technology partners, and obviously the integration staff.
Right.
Ron, we've also in the manufacturing section of some of our software now with Axpro, ProWatch, some of the items that we have are general things like that. We can pass on the passwords, can be changed monthly per requirements from the GSOC from their command center, and change 10,000 cameras now in an hour versus it would have taken a long time years ago. So we're putting in tools to help enable the customers to manage their compliance issues much easier than it was before.
All right, great. All right, a couple questions that are more about traditional physical security. So what will it take for the regulatory agencies such as such as NRC, I'm not sure if they meant NRC or NERC, to update the design basis threat for emerging and advancing technologies? The conversations I've had with senior leaders at regulated energy production sites have shown that updated security measures, particularly against drones, will not happen due to cost until regulators require it.
Yeah, that statement's extremely valid, right? You hear different from regulated utilities in Southern California than you do in Northeastern Ohio, than you do in Chicago, about impacts of legislation around drone deployments and law enforcement involvement. I think these NERC standards, SIP 14, need to be looked at closely and updated, right? Still stopping any cloud deployments in some of these substations because of SIP 14. I think the drone deployments and counter drone deployments need to be looked at closer, and it's going to take some lobby money with groups like Security Industry Association and powerhouses like Hanwha and Honeywell to get behind that, to lobby to make some of these things happen, Ron.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, again, from my perspective, I think it's going to take a lot more bad stuff happening, to be honest with you. I think that's how our regulations kind of come about. Just because there's an emerging threat or something that is threatening doesn't mean it's been executed, and maybe it hasn't been executed to the point to where it's gotten enough attention to be part of an update to a design basis threat or something like that. And then I think, again, you're talking about design basis threat at an NRC level versus a NERC or a FERC level. Again, two different animals in that respect.
Yeah, and Sean, it reminds me of your point about having to assess, given the limitations on budget, assess where the needs are, assess what's going to be the most cost efficient, and make the difficult choices.
Yeah, and that investment level slides with the size of the electric utilities. So the smaller utilities, just by definition, have less revenue, and of that revenue, they've got less they can spend on security. So they have to be very diligent where that spend actually goes. In my years doing this, and I'm sure my friends here would agree, I've never run into someone that wants less cyber or less physical security. It's always how much can I put in for the amount of budget that I'm allotted? And then the risk-based approach helps them define where those monies are spent.
All right, so a couple other questions here. All right, so a lot of the conversation has centered around substations or other utility distribution structures. Is there any concern or comment regarding securing energy generation sites, such as dams and coal burning production sites that could be targeted for sabotage? These sites are not governed by the NRC like nuclear and have gotten a lot of attention due to animosity from environmentalists.
Yeah, they're still regulated by maybe, again, NRC, Nuclear Regulatory Commission, versus the NERC. Two different design basis threats, and they are governed by NERC, especially if they're producing power to the bulk electric system. And the utilities I work with are pretty forward leaning with their security. Like you said, there's not a lot of people out there wanting less security. It's really just how much they can afford. So again, just putting in physical security, replacing old fences, and updating cameras, stuff like that. I think those periphery, if you want to call them that, power generation sites are again pretty well protected, in my opinion. Just as fragile as the rest of the bulk electric system, but pretty well regulated and protected, in my opinion.
Yeah, so
Yeah, you do have a little difference where the power generation sites, for the most part, are manned in some way. So you have the security systems in there for detection, but response is almost instantaneous because you can send a person over there in a truck. There is a lot of generation in this country that is fast start, simple cycle gas turbines, and those facilities are unmanned. And then now you've got distributed generation, solar and battery storage, which those sites are typically unmanned, posing additional challenges for us. So substations are acute because a lot of them are unmanned and in remote locations, and they can actually be BES-high systems that can have a measured impact on the bulk electric system if they're taken out.
yeah,
And parts are still hard to get, so that also for the utilities, if these things are damaged, they might not. If we lose one substation, we might be okay. But if we lose several, we might not be able to get all the parts to get them back up and running with over a year. Some cases.
Is part of the reason that the conversation has been largely about substations recently because they've done a fairly good job to this point with the energy production facilities already. So the substations are softer targets. So naturally that's where the attacks are going to take place.
Yeah, and maybe a little bit my fault, Ron, is Dave and I've had such a focus on that for the last year that I think I brought it up on one of our prep calls, and now we've kind of have an hour worth of technology and challenges to talk about. And I think if we get into some dams and things like that, bridges, we'd need another hour.
Right. All right. Next question. What are some suggestions for improving connectivity with remote site technology, particularly with very rural substations? Again, back to the substations. Issues with camera footage quality in particular when using analytic event monitoring have plagued security officer response to events in rural areas with poor remote connectivity.
Yeah, I imagine sharing a T1. I'll let you go with that one. Go, Jack.
Yeah, so as far as connectivity, infrastructure, getting connectivity is sometimes the most expensive thing. It could be, a refinery, substation. You can't just trench cable everywhere. There's wireless technology being used. But I think if we can lower the footprint of what's being transmitted, I think that's the key. That's something you can control at a camera level. So if you're doing analytics, do it in the camera for multiple reasons before the video is compressed. You don't have packet loss, so you do it in the camera. There's also onboard recording with micro SD or SD cards, so you can have that clip there in high resolution, and you can just send something at a lower resolution, but detect what's on the perimeter or inside wherever that is, using analytics, and send still images, send a short video clip as needed, rather than piping that video back and using analytics at a SOC or at a centralized location. Go to a more of a distributive system for video analytics. That's the key. And then you don't have a central point of failure, and yeah, you can reduce what's being transmitted. And I would say start there rather than overhauling your communications network, which is a huge task.
Ron, I think that was spot on. Continue to get better analytics and better compression algorithms. And doing more at the edge, I think, will solve some of those problems. It was a great question, though, because it is a big challenge at some of these remote locations.
Yeah.
All right. So in our last few minutes, if you don't mind, I'd like to go around to each of you and just get some closing thoughts and maybe one or two key takeaways that you'd like to leave attendees with. So I'm hesitant to put anybody on the spot with this question. So if anybody has something already in mind, I'll let you jump in first.
Yeah,
Sean.
I can maybe go really quick. I think we've talked a lot about compliance and new technologies here today, and including with the keynote this morning. So the asset owners are the ones, the utilities themselves are the ones that actually have to comply with the NERC regulations through their regional entities. So even if you're a supplier to a utility, I think it's good to brief yourself up and maybe even train your people internally on what the requirements are so that you can better support the utility or the asset owner in their compliance. And then maybe second, and I think this was mentioned in the keynote, technology is changing fast. And you saw some, I think, examples of some emerging technologies and security with the panel here today. So maybe for those that are on here in your teams, designate one person and maybe make it part of their job to stay on top of new technology and have them report, every month or every quarter what's going on out there. Vendors are always willing to come in, but just that alone, I think, could help teams see how new technologies might be able to help them honestly get a little bit more bang for their buck and improve incident response times or reduce risk. But if it's kind of something that if you don't, I think, dedicate an individual or time to it, you're not going to be able to see all the benefits of the new stuff that's out there.
All right, great points. Thanks, Sean.
Hey, Ron. I thought this was great. It's a great job keeping us on track today, Ron. Definitely my pleasure, Ike, Zara, Dave, and Sean, to be part of this with you. A couple thoughts I would leave is continue to train around prevention and response, and continue to push hard to be part of those cyber requirements to create those cyber events that could happen with all the devices we're putting on the network.
All right, well said.
And this is Dave. I guess in a simple way for utilities to plan sustainability in everything that they're doing, and open APIs, and keeping things at the edge that they can move forward with, because getting the capital once is often very difficult for them. So we want to have something that we can build on and can sustain for years to give them those reliable protections. And often getting new servers for the utilities for any industry is difficult today. So if that technology they're employing can be at the edge, would make it easier for them to keep that going forward, I think.
Okay. Thanks, Steve. And Zaray, any parting thoughts?
Yeah, just to add on to what Sean says, and designate a person to actually learn the technology, own the technology, and maybe do a pilot or POC. How does this product work? Push the envelope, and maybe have a substation which is offline or test bed where you can test some of this stuff. But to Sean's point, yeah, there has to be a person to have that conversation and a genuine interest, because the technology is changing. We mentioned drones, we mentioned doing things on the edge, and once you do that, you can do that mitigation with audio or smart LED lights or all these other things. But that in itself, learning those technologies, how they work, and to what Dave said, the interoperability is huge. You don't want to pigeonhole yourself in a technology where something doesn't work, or you need to spend tens of thousands to make it work. So I think if you can have some dedicated resources that are going to learn the technology at more than a surface level, you're going to get you're going to move the needle, I think.
Right. All right. Well said. And Ike, you get the last word.
Yeah, yeah, I'm glad to take the last word so I can kind of bring it all the way back to the beginning, right? Just you have to understand your design basis threat. You have to understand who your bad guys are, who you're defending against, and then you have to build your adversary sequence diagram to close that gap of response. Everybody here on this panel is a layer of security in the security system, and when those systems, start going dark, you have to understand how much time you have from the last point of detection for your bad guys to get to your protected assets. So again, I've been to a lot of consultations where folks don't really understand what their bad folks look like. And I think we have to start there and then understand the timeline that your barrier systems give you so you can get a response.
All right. Great way to wrap it up. All right. Once again, thank you, everyone. Really appreciate it. Great discussion. A lot of excellent insights. Really appreciate you doing this.
Happy holidays.
Thanks, everybody.
It's fun.
Happy holidays.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Bye.
All right. Finally, we are pleased to be able to welcome a pair of speakers from Water ISAC, a congressionally authorized group that brings together the nation's leading water and wastewater associations and foundations to support and advance security in that sector. So as with the previous panel, I'll ask the speakers to introduce themselves. So let's start with Alec.
Hello, my name is Alec Davison. I'm an all hazards risk analyst at the Water Information Sharing and Analysis Center, and I'm looking forward to briefing you all today. Thank you. Hand it over to my colleague, Jen Walker.
Thank you, Alec. So I'm Jennifer Lynn Walker. I'm the Director of Infrastructure Cyber Defense for the Water ISAC. I have about 25 years in cybersecurity, well, before cybersecurity was a thing. I have more of a technology or a technical background. So I've done malware analysis, threat intelligence, insider threats, and then of course now critical infrastructure, cybersecurity, and cyber safety. I think that's it. I've been with Water ISAC since 2017, so I'm really happy to be here today.
All right. Thank you both for being here. We're thrilled to be able to partner with your organization on this. So I'll turn things over to you.
Thank you. Thanks,
Slides
Alex.
should be up.
The slides. Yep, I can see them. So absolutely. All right. So good afternoon. Again, thank you for inviting us to brief today. We're actually going to do kind of a threat landscape for the water and wastewater sector for cyber and physical. So I'll cover the cyber and Alex will be covering the physical. So just kind of set the stage. This deck, especially the cyber resources, are kind of loaded, but don't worry. To be keeping with time, I won't be glossing over a lot of it, but the content's here for your awareness or future reference. And just nothing sensitive, but if you do get a copy or wish to have a copy of the slides, that's not a problem. I would just ask you not to share them across public sources. So we are designating this presentation TLP green. Next slide. So during this brief, we're going to cover some threats and incidents in the water and wastewater sector, along with other threats facing critical infrastructure nationally or even globally, for that matter, for a bigger picture of the overall threats that we track and are concerned about for the sector, as well as adjacent sectors and critical infrastructure at large. But first, just a quick note about Water ISAC. Next slide. So Water ISAC, or Water Information Sharing and Analysis Center, was established in 2002 and created by water and wastewater utilities through the sector associations that you see listed at the bottom. This is at the urging of a White House presidential decision directive in 1998 to encourage cyber threat information sharing between public and private sector organizations at large, and across government and among the critical infrastructure organizations themselves. So not just for one sector, but across all the critical infrastructure sectors. The creation of Water ISAC was specifically urged by the EPA and the FBI to enhance the security of the sector to provide things like threat advisories and mitigation practices. Next slide. Essentially, Water ISAC tracks the threats across all hazards. So even though that presidential decision directive was based on cyber threat sharing, this Water ISAC and some other ISACs have taken on the mission to look at the all hazards threat environment. So you'll hear Alec and I talk today about cyber, physical, as well as natural disasters and even threats to public health. Next slide. Essentially, we, along with other ISACs for their respective sectors, like the electricity ISAC, oil, natural gas, other critical infrastructure, health ISAC as well. We track the threats, incidents, and available reporting from various sources, whether it's government, non-government, other ISACs and private organizations, and then report out what's most relevant and should be top of mind as far as Water ISAC goes to the water and wastewater system sector. And we do this so you or the utilities or other stakeholders don't have to. So next slide. With that, enough about who we are. I did promise, to talk a little bit about what we're tracking. So next slide. So Water ISAC tracks threats and incidents at water and wastewater utilities, again, along with other threats impacting critical infrastructure that are top of mind. One more reminder, slides are here for your reference. Just going to try to hit the wave top, but I don't want to be remiss. There's a lot of good information out there, and I want everyone to have access to the information if they don't have it already and would like it. I do note a lot of SIA reporting, so Cyber Security Infrastructure Security Agency reporting, as with SIA being the nation's cybersecurity advisor, along with collaboration from its international partners as well as its JCDC or Joint Cyber Defense Collaborative industry partners. There's a lot of valuable reporting out there, and we definitely like to highlight that. So again, I encourage you to check out those resources. So we'll be talking about some of these things that are on this slide today. Next slide. I'm going to take a quick look at some of the incidents that have occurred in the water and wastewater sector. Next slide. I apologize that Alec and I had some conflicts, so we came on here late. So if this was being discussed, please accept my apology for the review. But of course, I need to start with some of the most recent activity about the Unitronics PLCs. But what I want to impress here is that this isn't about the who it impacted or the what, which I actually didn't even put the who on this slide. But anyway, or the what, but the why and the how. So in recent weeks, we've been hearing a lot about the Cyber Avengers. They're a cyber threat group being linked to the Iranian government, Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, or IRGC for short. Cyber Avengers has been attacking unsecured Israeli-made Unitronics Vision Series PLCs that are publicly exposed to the internet. At this point, they've just been defacing them. They haven't demonstrated yet the capability to do anything beyond a little disruption, but they are accessing these PLCs through the use of default passwords that haven't been changed. Most notable is that these PLCs are commonly used in the water and wastewater sector, at least that's notable to us. However, they are also used in other industries such as energy, food and beverage manufacturing, and healthcare. So the first report of this activity came from the Municipal Water Authority of Aliquippa. I've heard a lot of people in the last 3 weeks say, I'm not sure how to pronounce that, and I'm going to butcher it. So I'm just letting you know it's Aliquippa. I happen to know because I live in the neighboring county. So right here, Aliquippa is a small system just north of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, located on the Ohio River. But as I mentioned, this activity highlights that we aren't necessarily targets for who or where we're located, but for what we have, our data or our devices, and how accessible or vulnerable or exploitable it is. So, and this is regardless of size, the size of our organization or how many people that we serve. A little town in, north of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and Aliquippa never thought that they would be the victim of a cyber attack. But it wasn't, no one, who are we? No one, no one wants what we have. We don't have anything important. Well, they had something that was really, that happened to be accessible, as did other water utilities. There was a brewery here in Pittsburgh and, some other entities that have been impacted by this particular activity. But just encourage folks to, please don't dismiss or defer this activity and its recommendations, or this advisory and its recommendations and mitigations. But this really, the importance here is, the overall, it's identifying all internet exposed programmable logic controllers or PLCs, not just these Unitronics ones. This activity was about the cyber vendors and then looking for, their anti-Israeli messages, to impact this Israeli-made component. But again, this is bringing larger awareness to the larger issue of insecure PLCs being accessible on the internet. Don't assume you're air gapped. Don't assume they're not on the internet. Please verify them. And when you find them, make sure that they don't have default passwords. So address these advisories accordingly. Additionally, I'd like to highlight, and I think we came on the call a little late, but I think I kind of caught a little bit of the messaging, from the previous panel. Water and wastewater utilities, or any utility really that outsources SCADA support, any of the smaller ones, whatnot, that outsource SCADA support, I really, really, really urge you to consult with your integrators and your support vendors to confirm or insist that recommended practices are being followed, whether it's regarding, this Unitronics device that you may or may not run, or other PLCs, Rockwell, Siemens, whatever. Confirm and insist that these recommended practices are being followed. Check these internet exposed PLCs. They're exceedingly trivial to discover, and default passwords are widely known by attackers, making them easy to gain access to. And that's why we've been talking about this for, since this occurred on November. Well, we found out about it on November 28th. So next slide. Next up, in regards to other cyber threats to water and wastewater utilities, about 2 years ago, a little over 2 years ago now, there was a joint cybersecurity advisory published in October of 2021. This just highlighted ongoing malicious cyber activity targeting the U.S. water and wastewater sector. I'm really just sharing this report for those that may not have been aware of it. Yes, it is 2 years old now, as I said, but it does provide a nice compilation in one spot of some notable water and wastewater sector cyber incidents up to that date. So this activity is not inclusive. You may even be familiar with it, but it's a really nice recap that, that the sector has been experiencing cyber incidents. Just a kind of a quick note, a reminder, kind of on that fourth bullet down there on the Florida incident. That's the Oldmar incident. And while I consider Oldmar had kind of become somewhat of a poster child for water wastewater sector incidents, I don't mean to laugh at that. It's not funny, but every presentation always seems to mention Oldmar, unfortunately, including mine here. But in March of this year, if you weren't aware, it was reported by a former manager for the city of Oldmar that, contrary to what was initially disclosed back in 2021, the former manager reported this year in March that the incident was caused by human error and not an external threat actor. So I just wanted to make a note about that in case you weren't aware. I still run across people that weren't aware of that update. It's still an important incident. It doesn't dismiss the incident really in any way. It just changes it, the complexion of it a little bit from an external threat actor to what ended up being an accidental insider threat. Next slide, Alec. So apologies, this needs to be updated a bit. There's some incidents here in between, but just kind of, these are several of the sector incidents that have made headlines. It's just, again, it's just goes to show that, the water and wastewater sector does experience incidents, and this is why we're here and why we're tracking the threat environment. However, I think most importantly, Water ISAC sends out its quarterly survey to its members. Next slide, Alec. And our quarterly survey asks members about physical and cyber incidents. The survey, along with receiving reports on our incident report form and incident reporting phone line, revealed that the reality today is that most of the incidents that are being reported, again, whether they're open source or member reported, don't involve breaking into control system networks and directly disrupting industrial control processes. And even with that, many of the control system impacting incidents that have been reported in the sector or even in other critical infrastructure sectors end up being IT-based in nature, such as an HMI running on a Windows device that gets hit with ransomware or something like that. In large part, I believe that this imbalance in reporting isn't because industrial control system attacks aren't happening. I believe this imbalance is due to much greater visibility that we have of activity against the IT systems than there is for ICS right now. hence the encouragement for deploying ICS cybersecurity monitoring technologies across critical infrastructure, including the water and wastewater sector. And kind of a note for the smaller utilities, just because we can't see it, see the activity doesn't mean it isn't happening or that threat actors aren't lurking in our OT network. So, ICS monitoring for smaller systems is equally important. There are, cost-effective solutions that, that we could discuss, not today, that's for another show. And as far as the large utilities, with that have ICS monitoring implemented, please share what you're seeing with us or with your sector ISAC. If you're an electricity sector, oil, natural gas, share what you're seeing so that we can better inform our respective sectors. Not to tell who is seeing what, but so that we can anonymously share what threat actors are interested in so everyone can better protect themselves. But as you can see on this slide, this is largely what we've been observing from our members anyway. These are commodity threats that everyone is experiencing, from the social engineering that's trying to accomplish things like a business email compromise or phishing, or to commit fraudulent acts such as fake invoice payments, fraudulent payroll redirections, and of course ransomware. Often even these attacks as well are bypassing those multi-factor authentication controls to do so. So lots of things to be concerned about. And then, of course, there's the exploitation of those IT-based vulnerabilities. Next slide. Now, a little bit for the direct threats to critical infrastructure. Again, this is the organizations and the operational technology, the ICS, the SCADA, the networks, and whatnot that run the plants. Again, using the wave tops here, the topics and CISA activity alert reports are there for reference on these next set of slides, so you can check them out later. So there's been much emphasis lately on threat actors using living off of land techniques, and with great success. According to Microsoft, this activity group, Bolt Typhoon, has been ongoing since mid-2021, and it has attacked key infrastructure sectors in Guam and the United States and others. But those are the kind of the most relevant, close to home ones. And this does include water and wastewater utilities, communications, manufacturing, other utilities, maritime government, and more. One of the main techniques of the group using groups that use living off the land tactics is that they utilize existing network management tools that we already have in our networks. And in some cases, they're also, they've got a human at the keyboard, that, interacting with, with those tools to achieve their objectives, which is allowing the attackers to evade detection by blending in with normal Windows system and network activities. So as defenders, it's important for us to better scrutinize whether or not that legitimate looking traffic is actually authorized. And then, in some cases, we need to get creative on our detection and alerting. Next slide. Next up, last April, there was a joint cybersecurity advisory, which also included collaboration from Mandiant and Duragos. But this information was published about the 7th known ICS-focused malware since Stuxnet. Fortunately, it was discovered before it had been deployed on, at least on any US systems that we're aware of. The need to know here is I want to emphasize that the tools that this framework was involved with, the tools were not designed to exploit vulnerabilities. The framework was designed to leverage legitimate functionality in these components that could ultimately lead to a loss of safety, availability, or control. The tools discussed here the framework discussed here had been discovered thus far, again, designed to control these components. But it should be noted that it's likely these are not all inclusive. This activity continues to be researched and is believed to be a highly scalable framework, again, that could be leveraged against many other components, not just the ones that you see listed on this slide. Next slide. Earlier this year, Mandiant published intelligence on what they tracked as cosmic energy. And while not believed to be an active threat to US critical infrastructure at this time, the activity does represent the latest example of specialized OT capable malware capable of causing cyber physical impacts. And again, principally taking advantage of insecure by design features of OT environments. Next slide. So despite the reference report actors here, the People's Republic of China in this report, the main concern here is the exploitation of old vulnerabilities. Like the splash thing says, patching is hard, exploiting unpatched devices, not so much. Bad guys keep exploiting old vulnerabilities because they know we're frankly terrible at patching. Yes, these are IT vulnerabilities, but water and wastewater utilities and any utility for that matter doesn't run on OT alone. So IT is just as important. My takeaway here is regardless of your environment, whether it's OT or IT, I encourage you to update and patch as able, compensate with other controls when you can't patch, or isolate when neither is possible. But ignoring vulnerabilities is not an option. So update, compensate, or isolate. Next slide. Speaking of known vulnerabilities, in the interest of critical infrastructure at large, I specifically want to call out that there are ICS or SCADA vulnerabilities on CISA's known exploited vulnerabilities catalog. There are many more that have dependencies on IT components that are related to ICS, but these are most of the ones that are specific to ICS components. And other than the one we just added from Unitronics about a week ago or so, the rest of them are from 2021 or older. But they're important because they are vulnerabilities, even though they're old, they haven't been patched, and they're vulnerabilities that we know for sure are being exploited. So if your utility uses these components, please address if you haven't already. But again, whether it's IT or OT environments, we recommend keeping track of the known exploited vulnerabilities catalog for prioritization. Next slide. This report just really emphasizes the importance of vendor risk and supply chain risk management. I heard the panel talking about that as well. Regardless of the type of trusted entity, whether it's an MSP, integrator, or other trusted third party, trust but verify, validate, challenge your vendors, challenge them with everything. Many third party trusted relationships, I think, as the panel said, are exploited or compromised, and then leveraged for various things, whether it's social engineering tactics to get a foothold, in the system, or to steal money or other data from partners. And this includes water and wastewater utilities. Next slide. We already talked about the People's Republic of China there at the bottom in some of those screenshots. But I do just want to remind us that while Russian activity from the Ukraine war has, from a cyber perspective, has waned for the most part, except for maybe some wiper malware, we can't be complacent and still need to remain vigilant about the various threats emanating from this very capable, these very capable actors and their allies. Again, the reports are listed here for reference with the details and behaviors to defend against. Next slide. I want to point out that across all of the reports that I've been talking about, and I think I mentioned it a little earlier, but there's a handful of common, not very unique, adversary behaviors. So regardless of the threat actor, whether it's advanced or criminal, certainly there are nuances, which makes it important to read the various reports that are out there. But with occasional exception, most threat actors are not very creative. And they don't have to be, because the same techniques still work today that worked yesterday and will still likely work for the foreseeable future until we get better at defending against and forcing them to change their behaviors. Of course, that kind of leaves that whole cat and mouse thing, but we have to be quicker to defend and forcing them to change tactics, increase the return on investment for them. Next up, normally I typically discuss some proactive defensive measures, but in the interest of time, the slides are here for reference. So just a few quick wins. Next slide, Alex, and then next slide. A few more quick wins here. However, if you remember only one thing that I've shared today, my encouragement and my challenge is to be a good neighbor. Reach out to your neighboring utilities, water, rural water utilities, small co-ops, whatever. Essentially bring a friend to your next event, whether you're a participant or maybe you're hosting something like a tabletop exercise. You probably have a relationship with those, neighboring utilities for some other type of business operations. Whether it's some regional meetings or local meetings or whatnot, but please make sure you add cybersecurity to the conversation, especially if the system is small from a water perspective, if they serve less than 3,300 population and don't fall under, any regulation like the WIA risk and resilience requirements for drinking water, or they're a smaller, less mature wastewater system. But again, this goes for all of the smaller, utilities. Just take them under your wing and be a good neighbor. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Alex for the physical threat environment.
Thank you, Jen. Appreciate it. So hello, everyone. Again, I'll be discussing the physical security threat landscape. Making sure my slides will advance. There we go. So much of the information presented here can be found in Water ISAC's threat analysis report. It's pictured here on the slide. It's available for our members on our website and can be used to help inform your security priorities. So the physical security threat landscape facing the water and wastewater sector today is dynamic, volatile, and complex. The sector is increasingly viewed as an attractive target by a wide range of threat actors. Among these actors, terrorist and violent extremists represent a particularly lethal and persistent threat due to their relentless desire to attack critical infrastructure, including water and wastewater systems, in furtherance of their ideological goals. Additionally, hostile nation states such as China and Russia increasingly seek to target U.S. and Western national interests, and in pursuit of these goals could attempt to degrade, disrupt, or destroy critical infrastructure. Lastly, criminals and malicious insiders remain enduring threats to the sector. So a past DHS National Terrorism Advisory System bulletin emphasized the U.S. remains in a heightened threat environment due in part to continuing calls for violence directed at critical infrastructure. Of course, physical threats against infrastructure have greatly increased over the past few years. In fact, a report by George Washington University found that since 2019, domestic violent extremist plots against critical infrastructure have significantly increased. For example, in April of this year, 2 men were sentenced to in federal court for planning to attack electric substations across the U.S. in furtherance of white supremacist ideology and in their acceleration objectives. So since 2020, fusion centers and other federal government agencies have observed a significant increase in online threats and plots against critical infrastructure. Specifically, users in extremist online forums or chat groups associated with white supremacist and neo-Nazi ideologies, as well as accelerationist doctrine, are increasingly advocating for attacks against electrical infrastructure specifically. As you've all seen in the news recently, I'm sure there's an increasing amount of physical security incidents occurring in electric substations across the country. And as we know, due to interdependency with the water sector, attacks disrupting the power supply would certainly produce cascading impacts to operation and services to other utilities. So as you can see here, this slide is just on the left, graphic representing incidents at substations just during the first quarter of 2023. So physical incidents targeting the power grid rose 71% in 2022 compared to 2021. And as I mentioned in this slide, in the first quarter of 2023, there were twice the number of threats and attacks against substations compared to 2022. So since many of the perpetrators who committed these incidents continue to remain at large, and because violent extremists likely see these attacks as successful, it is possibly something they seek to emulate in other sectors. So based on that, we assess that violent extremists and other threat actors are increasingly viewing the water sector as a viable target. And that's supported by the sector sharing many of the perceived vulnerabilities associated with the energy sector, such as accessibility and remoteness of many sector assets, like a pumping station, a lack of on-site security personnel at some of these remote stations, and other perceived lack of robust protective security measures. So the increasing plots and attacks targeting critical infrastructure are likely being influenced by 4 recent violent extremist publications: Militant Accelerationism, Do It for the Gram, Make It Count, A Guide for the 21st Century Accelerationist, and The Hard Reset. So 2 of those, The Hard Reset is listed on your right, a portion of it, and Make It Count, the cover of it, is on your left. So these were all released between June 2021 and July 2022. These 4 publications are widely circulated in online forums such as Telegram on Telegram, and encourage readers to attack water and wastewater systems and multiple other critical infrastructure targets. Among them, The Hard Reset, which is pictured on the right, offers detailed guidance for disabling water treatment plants. It encouraged readers to target water processing and distribution infrastructure through arson, noting chlorine used in water treatment processes can cause intense, uncontrollable fires. It also recommends conducting research to find and sabotage choke points within water distribution grids by using fires, gunfires, explosives, electrical shorts, or thermite. So based on these documents and past security incidents we tracked, the weapons and tactics most likely to be used by threat actors include guns, rudimentary improvised explosive devices, arson or fire as a weapon, edge weapons, and vehicles as a weapon. Unmanned aerial systems or drones could be employed for malicious or criminal activity, but this is less likely. So highlighting the influence of these documents to mobilize individuals to violence, a violent extremist who shot and killed multiple people at a bar in Europe in October of last year cited Militant Accelerationism and The Hard Reset as recommended reading in his manifesto. He also directed readers to target infrastructure, destroy utilities, electricity, water supply, and sanitation. So As Jen noted, we do quarterly incident reports where we track physical and cyber incidents. And he just wanted to show you some of the different categories of incidents we track here at Water ISAC. But for the sake of time, I won't go through all these. So these security incidents and suspicious activities we track are in turn committed primarily by these categories of threat actors seen here. The arrow you see here highlights that threat actors such as common criminals target water utilities with more frequency, but more often than not, these incidents typically result in few operational impacts. However, as we go down the arrow, it is less probable that threat actors such as domestic violent extremists would attack a utility, but in the event this happens, it would be a high impact event with likely operational disruptions. So for extremist targeted violence, we assess the greatest threat is posed by lone offenders and small groups motivated by a range of ideological beliefs and personal grievances. We assess among violent extremists, the most likely to target the water sector are those who subscribe to accelerationism, which I've mentioned before. So the term accelerationist refers to adherents' expectations that their actions will hasten the beginning of an anticipated conflict. So they advocate the use of violence, including against the government and critical infrastructure. They hope that this will overthrow the existing social and political order, and they seek to establish a white ethno-state. Instead of mobilizing large numbers of people, accelerationist doctrine emphasizes decentralized, geographically dispersed small terrorist cells or lone actors committing violence. So over the past 5 years, Water ISAC has tracked at least 10 separate cases of domestic violent extremist groups or individuals who plotted to attack critical infrastructure, including the water sector, based on their accelerationism. Nevertheless, potential assailants could ultimately be motivated by a range of ideological beliefs, personal grievances, or financial incentives. Foreign terrorist organizations, again, also desire to attack critical infrastructure. Think of Al-Qaeda or the Islamic State. But we assess that among foreign terrorist threat, the most likely threat comes from homegrown violent extremists. And those are people who don't have contact with foreign terrorist groups directly, but are motivated or inspired by their ideology and live in the homeland. So I would be remiss if I said we remain concerned that the ongoing Israel-Hamas conflict could influence individuals in the homeland to conduct attacks, likely against public gatherings, but the potential for them to target critical infrastructure cannot be discounted. And of course, common criminals are an enduring threat to the water sector. In fact, most of the security incidents which are reported to and tracked by us are most likely perpetrated by common criminals with motives ranging from simple mischief to financial gain or revenge. But even if they're not trying to cause an operational impact, many times it can lead to, for instance, fears of contamination after a water tank breach could cause a utility to drain the tank, and stolen equipment or components from a utility could lead to service disruptions. And also in rare cases, criminals may be trying to disrupt a service so that they can conduct a malicious activity. And just on the screen here for your all's reference is a few various FBI reports released over the past 2-3 years highlighting malicious activity / criminal activity in the water sector. And of course, lastly, insider threats and workplace violence remains a significant concern for the sector. So I know we're short on time. I won't go into these, but here's a few notable extremist plots and incidents involving the sector. Briefly, the 2018 one was you classify as a homegrown violent extremist, a woman online advocating for users to attack water infrastructure and poison water infrastructure. And then lastly, the November one with 2 domestic violent extremist members who were sentenced to prison for planning, among other things, to poison water supplies and attack other critical infrastructure. And here are some other infrastructure attacks and also developments that have cross-sector relevancy because of interdependency. Most recently, I'll just note this last one, there was attacks against hydroelectric dam substations in Idaho and Oregon over the summer. And again, here are some physical security resources. These are non-exhaustive, but I would just note to check out our Water ISAC membership, and we'd offer a 60-day free trial where you would get access to our quarterly incident summaries and as well as our threat analysis report along with threat mitigation guidance. So I appreciate you all's time. I know, see if we have a few more time for questions.
All right. Well, thank you both. Great presentations. One thing that really struck me was the point that Jennifer made about how these aren't necessarily sophisticated hackers. They're taking targets of opportunity. They're seizing on vulnerabilities. They're unpatched and unupdated software. And I can't believe we're still talking about default passwords not being changed. But thanks. A lot of great points. And also, Alec, your point about the attacks on the energy infrastructure, being a potential precursor, given their unfortunate success to some degree, being carried over into the water sector. So, but perfect timing. So I think we'll have to wrap things up at this point. And thank you so much for joining us. I hope we can work with you guys on future projects. That'd be great. Obviously, a wealth of great information. So really appreciate your help with this.
Thank you for inviting us.
Absolutely. All right. So with that, I'd like to thank the rest of our panelists as well. Really appreciate their support and taking their time to provide all the information today. Thank you to everyone who attended. And of course, thank you to our sponsor, Sage Integration. Once again, please check them out, sageintegration.com. Really appreciate their support. A great SIA member. And happy holidays, everyone. And we'll see you next time around.